Oh, Philippines, my Philippines. What a beautiful song. But do you know that in 1945, exactly 76 years ago, February became the bloodiest month in the history of its nation. But it was the 3rd of February. As the calendar shows, it was the first Saturday. Was it a coincidence the Americans arrived on first Saturday? As first Saturday, the Catholics honor the Blessed Mother, like the way the Catholics honor every first Friday to the Sacred Heart. And it was also on the first Saturday, March 3, that American military authorities declared Manila free from the savage enemy, although Manila was in ruins. War was over. Then, but Manila was in ruins. The newspapers abroad, like America, Yanks pour into Manila. They thought it was a victory. But did they expect that it would take not a day, not 2 or 3 or a week to liberate Manila? It took them a month. It was so bloody that some people did not like to remember it. Like attorney Diosdado Goitinco kept it to himself until 50 years when I visited him for the interview. Who was Goitinco? Attorney Diosdado Goitinco? He was a witness to the liberation of UST, as he was the lone Filipino companion of the late Captain Manuel Colayco, who died 10 days or 7 days after he was mortally wounded at UST. This is February 3, 1945, when the 1st Cavalry entered Manila from the north, while the 37th Infantry used another route from Bulacan, while the cavalry entered Manila from Novaliches and reached Monumento, Caloocan, and entered Rizal Avenue. The 1st Cavalry made a historical dash to the city like never before in its history. It took them 1 week. They rushed with less than 1,000 men. They even did not have medics in the rush. Led by General Chase, Billy Chase, and divided into 3 columns. This one headed towards UST, while the other column, composed of tanks, jeeps, a weapons carrier, headed towards Malacanang Palace to liberate the palace. The other one was assigned to liberate the legislative, thinking that the bridges were intact. It was a big news to the Americans. As the newspaper shows, Yanks pour into Manila, and they thought they could liberate Manila. To liberate the over 4,000 civilian internees, Americans mostly, at UST. The American cavalry, led by Colonel Haskett O'Connor, headed towards UST. But they somewhat got lost using pictures as maps, aerial pictures. And they had the wrong direction. And they met some opposition at P. Guevara Elementary School, some 2 kilometers away from UST. And thanks, there were 2 Filipinos who met them along the way. One was Captain Manuel Colaico, who met the Americans. Like many Filipinos, welcomed them at Rizal Avenue. Being the head of Manila's AIB, the Allied Intelligence Bureau, guerrillas, the 39-year-old professor of Ateneo University boarded the jeeps. And later on, he saw someone he knew, his assistant, Lieutenant Diosdado Goitinco, the former Corps Commander of Ateneo Municipal de Manila. The two boarded the jeeps. Diosdado Goitinco later on graduated law at University of Santo Tomas. Both of them were unarmed. While another Filipino, Vicente Quirolf, also guided the Americans that headed towards the legislative, and he was killed in the street-to-street battle that evening near Far Eastern University. Lieutenant Vicente Quirolf was armed and took part in the battle in Novaliches, armed with an M1 carbine. But while he was distributing goodies to the Filipinos who welcomed them at Ascaraga, now Recto Avenue, a sniper killed him. While the 1st Cavalry and the 37th Infantry were heading towards Manila, another force that came after doing a paradrop, the 511th Airborne, landed at Tagaytay Ridge safely and headed towards Manila, but they were stopped by strong Japanese resistance at Parañaque. At first, Haskett Connor, the head of the column heading towards UST, didn't trust the two Filipinos, but later on, the knowledge they were giving him made him trust them. At UST, that's Goitinco talking to an American officer at the middle of UST. They reached UST around 6 to 6:30 in the evening. While they were planning, a grenade thrown by the Japanese hit some American officers, including Lieutenant Colonel Haskett Connor. Haskett Connor was wounded in the leg. Instead of relegating his command, he ordered the American cavalry to charge towards UST, while his companion, Goitinco's companion and head, was mortally wounded. Captain Colaico was hit in the stomach, was bleeding, feeling cold, and Goitinco, his former student, Diosdado Goitinco at Ateneo, gave him or offered him his shirt, and he was taken to UST. Later on, it was safer, given surgery but he died later on, 7 days later, at Legarda Elementary School. But even though he was still recovering, Captain Colaiko asked Lieutenant Guitinco to go back to the headquarters, get the important intelligence maps that showed that the streets of Manila, where the Americans were about to pass, were not safe as previous maps showed. The maps showed that those streets were heavily mined by the Japanese. So Guitinco went to the headquarters alone and came back. And Lieutenant Josado Guitinco gave the maps to the American cavalry. And the officers were so grateful that made him an honorary member of the 1st Cavalry and even invited him to join them. He served as a scout, but he was not given any weapon at all, not even a knife to defend himself. Oh my. Sa Manila, laid in ruins on March 3, 1945. Manila, the once proud Pearl of the Orient, was a total wasteland. Before the battle, Manila became a battleground. The first time that Americans encountered and had to fight in a city. The Japanese burned every building, bombed every building as they were retreating. This was in the heart of the city, the commercial district, and this is UST. The liberated American internees, there are 4,000 of them, 75% were Americans, the rest were British and other nationals. Liberated at last, after 3 dark years. Also liberated were 1,000 American civilians being held at the old beloved prisons, now Manila City Jail. The Americans did not know that they were there because they were actually in Baguio, but the Japanese sent them to Manila 2 months before the arrival of the Americans. Most of them were malnourished, just like those at UST. He was sober, interviewing a war survivor. His brothers were all members of the guerrilla. Ramon Ventosa Sr. He saw the war, the liberation of Malacanang. They were playing high alay with the ball, with the racket, when they saw the jeeps of the Americans arriving. But he could not forget the memories, those sad memories, where many of his friends and classmates became one of those 100,000 unarmed civilians who perished in the Battle of Manila. The once Pearl of the Orient, the Paris in Asia was a total wasteland. That's San Marcelino Church. This is Singalong, dying woman. City Hall. So March 3, 76 years ago, Manila was declared free from the enemy. Buildings can be restored, but the values were shattered. This is one of the tanks, the famous one, Battling Instinct, that entered UST. MacArthur declared Manila the Warsaw of Asia. Since Warsaw was the most destroyed city in Europe, but actually Manila was more devastated than Warsaw. There's MacArthur talking to General Kruger, whom he assigned at Lingayen to liberate the civilian internees at UST using the 37th Infantry. But he later used, as the infantry was delayed, he ordered also the 1st Cavalry to go to Manila. But General Douglas MacArthur and General Kruger celebrated their 65th birthday on the same day, January 26, 1945. That's when MacArthur wanted to enter Manila on his 65th birthday and grand, but that didn't happen. That's Diosdado Goitinco as a retired lawyer, 50 years after the war. That's 1995 when I first interviewed him. And that's the first time he told his wife he admitted how he took part in the war. He kept it for the past 50 years. Maybe he did not want to talk about it. He lost his professor at Ateneo and his boss at the AIB, Manuel Colaico. At times he told me, it doesn't pay to be a hero. Why did he say that? Was he referring how the Americans treated the guerrillas? How Truman rejected the idea of making the Filipinos who participated in the war, the USAFE, as citizens of the United States? That's the time when Attorney Diosdado Goitinco told his wife his participation in the war. The Americans later honored him. President Fidel Ramos of the Philippines also gave him recognition. But he said, "What have I done? I did nothing. It was just my duty to help humanity. I did nothing. I don't know why. I don't deserve these honors." Few are such men like Diosdado Goitinco. May he rest in peace. Here, I'm paying tribute to the resting place of hundreds of civilians. Close to 100 were Spanish priests, Franciscans, Recollects, and Augustinians who were murdered by the Japanese at the site of the former Palacio del Gobernador in Intramuros. In a raid shelter, they were killed by grenades. They were just among the 100,000 unarmed civilians in Manila who perished. $1,010 Americans were killed. Over 5,000 were wounded. The Japanese lost less than 15,000 who made a last stand, suicidal stand in the defense of the city of Manila, led by Admiral Sanyi Iwabuchi.